All right, hello everybody. It's great to be with you all today. I'm really excited for this conversation. Before we get going, I want to frame our discussion a little bit by reflecting on where we are. We are in Qatar, part of the GCC, an area of the world that has made enormous wealth with oil and gas, two of the main drivers of climate change, and this particular part of the world is being hit really hard by climate change. Extreme heat, drought, diminishing groundwater, these are just some of the challenges in the region. At the same time, a combination of the capital of this region, the need to solve these problems, and the entrepreneurial spirit, I think, make it a place that can make some of the solutions. All right, so with that as the frame, let's get going. I want to ask each of you to briefly describe what it is your company does and where you operate. Why don't we start with you, Rama?
Thank you. So my company is Transform VC. We operate out of Silicon Valley. We are a deep tech impact firm, which means we invest in companies that have AI plus climate or social impact.
Okay. Sky?
Yeah, I'm Sky Kurtz, the co-founder and CEO of Pure Harvest Smart Farms, and we're a technology-enabled agribusiness based here in the GCC, started in the United Arab Emirates, but we design, procure, construct, and operate controlled environment agriculture solutions and develop technologies that improve the efficiency of those solutions, but to farm fresh produce and make it possible in previously impossible climates and places in the world. And we sell under a consumer brand, Pure Harvest, in grocery stores, in hotels, restaurants, catering, et cetera.
Rama, I want to ask you this. You know, I cover climate change and businesses and sustainability, and I think there's a feeling among many businesses, it's changing, but that you can't make money and worry about the environment at the same time, that those things are mutually exclusive. I wonder if you come across this idea, this attitude, you know, in the work that you do and the investors that you talk to, and then how you confront it.
Absolutely. So historically, we viewed the investment tech sector and the social impact or climate impact sector as mutually exclusive, with one offering outlier financial returns and the other offering outlier sustainability returns or impact, if you will. And today, our premise, our thesis as a fund is you no longer have to compromise. You can have an impact entrepreneur who's a tech entrepreneur as well, who can guarantee both outlier financial and impact returns. And it's definitely something that our investors are very mindful of. Initially, we got some pushback, but we also chose investors that could comprehend this and are aligning with this mission and are finding graceful ways to do it.
So they're not mutually exclusive,
Not
right?
mutually exclusive. They're very much hand in hand, especially today with current technologies in AI and robotics. They make it so much more accessible and plausible.
Okay. Sky, I want to ask you a similar question, but maybe in a different way. When you were getting Pure Harvest off the ground, what came first? Did you decide that you wanted to operate in a sustainable way, or did you operate in a sustainable way because that was the way to be successful in a part of the world that's really hard hit with climate change?
It was admittedly the latter, right? As much as we are purpose-driven and it is quite fundamental to what we all sought to achieve in building Pure Harvest, that making clean, safe, sustainable, affordable produce available everywhere. But ultimately, you know, we see sustainability as part of our competitive advantage. And when you think of farming, interestingly and counterintuitively, my big pitch to investors early on when people were like, I'm going to do tomatoes in the desert, and people thought I was crazy. I was saying, no, we can be the most efficient farmers in the world, and here's why. The chemical process of photosynthesis is sunlight, CO2, water, nutrients. Where is there the most sun and CO2 in the world, right? In the Middle East. But then interestingly, you go down the other side, all the inputs to the farming process. You need light, labor, land, energy, water, taxation, transportation, capital. If you go down that list and benchmark, say, us against Europe, which was Holland, for example, exports all over the world, twice the light, lower labor costs, cheap and getting cheaper energy and more renewable, low taxes, capital availability. We crush it on every one of these dimensions. So that was the big belief, is that counterintuitively we could be the greatest place in the world to farm if you could solve for climate. So what it was about is the technology and methods and the commitment to solve those challenges. And I really ultimately, by solving those, we're creating a more sustainable food production method. Because when you're air freighting fresh produce to the Middle East, right, you're literally burning jet fuel to fly sacks of water around, is ultimately what you're doing. That can't be sustainable, and it can't be the way we feed people in this region, 50 years from now.
Yeah. Well, let me follow up on that a little bit, because I think even today, most people think of farming as, the guy out in the field, and you've got the sun, and you've got all these different elements. Weather can destroy crops. You can have good years, bad years. But really, what you're doing is very different, right? I mean, this is technological farming. And so I want to ask you to kind of step back for a second and maybe wonk out a little bit and tell us about some of the technical parts, where technology comes into your farming.
Certainly, I think you're right. The new farming is really food infrastructure. We're more analogous to a data center or an airport than we are to a traditional farm in some ways. And the reason why is, first of all, it's controlled environment ag. We build a structure and we protect the crops inside and regulate the inputs they receive and the climate that they operate in to make possible optimal production, right? And that's essentially a manufacturing process. The technologies, though, it ranges from, of course, there's the infrastructure itself, glass, steel, aluminum, infrastructure, et cetera. But what's unique is things like the climate management systems. We use multiple climate systems and a software that controls them. And now, because we have years of data, of operating data, we're developing a machine learning algorithm that automates the climate management. We've also developed an AI/ML tool that allows us to yield forecast. So we not only take the climate data, the crop measurements, the historical yields, and then we use an ensemble learning model that uses multiple regression techniques to predict the output of the farm. And that's a huge importance for not only the economics of production, but also commercial commitments. You can't commit to a customer, I'm going to deliver this much produce, if you don't have some accuracy of those estimates, right? So we're developing, there's both software and hardware making this possible. But then also we're standing on the shoulder of giants. We're not the first to think of hydroponic irrigation. There's a huge global industry for this, and innovators. So we buy what we can, build what we must, and then kind of partner where something's really special and efficient, where we don't have any unique insight to innovate any further, and we system integrate a solution that provides the optimal cost of production for the minimal resource inputs. That includes capital, energy, water, et cetera. And that's how we farm differently, right? It's a very complex process, but really it's a very integrated solution to deliver the outcome of clean, safe, sustainable, and more affordable produce.
And the result is, I mean, if you could just compare for a second the amount of produce you can get in the amount of land compared to traditional farming.
Yeah, we're the world's leading tomato production, for example, in terms of yield per meter squared. We maximize what we call the light efficiency, the unit of sunlight per kilogram of output, the photonic energy into food. We see ourselves as an energy company. We're an energy transition company, converting sun to calories as cheaply as possible. And so what we're getting now in yields, I mean, in tomato on the vine, for example, we're typically exceeding, on the low end, it'll be 10 to 15 times, and depending on the field farms in the Middle East, over 20 times the output per meter. We're also getting 7 to 10 times the output per unit of water versus a traditional low-tech greenhouse, versus field farming over 35 times more water efficient, which is a step change in resource efficiency for a region where, admittedly, water is the most valuable resource here. Oil's second. It's just we haven't valued water yet.
Yeah. Rama, I want to ask you at the beginning of our talk, I mentioned the enormous wealth built from fossil fuels in this region. How does Transform BC interpret that? I mean, do you take money from investors that come from fossil fuels when you are working to invest in companies that are climate friendly? I mean, what's the criteria?
Sure. So we do look for consistency in impact investing. And so we have turned down many investors from other sectors like pharmaceutical or in other spaces. But we are selective with those we take money from who are in the fossil fuel business. And we're typically looking for intent of change, number one. And number two, that lifelong consistency. So take, for example, Doha. I worked on the bid for the World Cup. And back then it was on the sustainability chapters of the bid. And I talked to a lot of the leadership in the country, and the conversations were very difficult, but very optimistic in terms of their commitment to offset whatever the climate challenges are going to be with the build out. And fast forward 12 years later or more, you could see that their commitment went through on all of the promises that they made, whether it was in the modularized construction of certain stadiums, to the giving to different communities, and supporting carbon offsets and other matters. So that consistency then gives us the assurance that, okay, they've got the wealth, this is where it came from, but they are very committed to putting that money into good use for the benefit of everyone at large in the world, both them and others elsewhere. And so we start working with them on projects of transformation. We haven't done that yet, but here's an example. One of the companies we've invested in is looked on to be a very transformational company in the battery swapping technology space. They will do for electric vehicles, what Elon Musk has done for one car brand, they're doing for any electric brand out there. Through battery swapping, you can just drive up to their station in under 5 minutes, swap the battery, and move on. And it's cheaper than fossil fuels, and it's a very sustainable system for us, because the same people that invested in building the gas stations are now putting in ample battery swapping stations. So partnering with fossil fuel companies that are saying, we know we're going to go out of business, here's a new business we can invest in that's better for the climate, it makes perfect sense.
And in those discussions, how do you make sure that there is accountability? When a company tells you, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, talk a little bit about how you build into their business plan to make sure that that happens.
Sure. So we look for several layers of impact. We first look at who we're investing in. And typically we're looking at founders that have been through social and climate challenges themselves. We have founders who were refugees, sons and daughters of immigrants who were farmers, and people who really had their finger on the pulse when it comes to the social and climate challenges that we're investing in. Second, we sit down with the founders before we even invest and ask for metrics. And even though we are a deep tech fund, and it's almost taboo to talk about anything other than the bottom line in Silicon Valley, we take those conversations very seriously and say, what is the one unit of measure that we're going to hold you accountable for from day one? And we start that journey with them. And our investors have signed up for that. So they understand that we're taking impact as seriously as we're taking their outlier financial returns. And as we move forward in the journey, if there's any stumbling blocks for founders that are going through financial difficulty, we bring in our advisors, we bring in our investors, and see how we can guide them so that they're not letting go of impact in favor of returns.
Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit with both of you and go a little bit personal, because I find as a journalist covering climate change, one of the most interesting things, of course, are the people who are working in this space and learning about their journey to what it is that they do. And getting to know both of you a little bit before this, I realized that neither of you woke up one day or just said, I'm gonna work in sustainability. I'm gonna tackle some major climate issues. It took a journey to get to this place, and so I just want to ask both of you to talk a little bit about that. And Sky, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so despite my name being Sky, I wasn't born a hippie, and I didn't have some eco cause from day one. Admittedly, actually, I grew up in a very low-income family in America, and specifically in a small town in northern Arizona, which you're familiar because you were in Phoenix, called Jerome. So you know this microscopic point on a map. But I grew up, poor, and I wanted to get out of poverty. So I literally had one mission when I was young, which was whatever pays best. And so I left right out of undergrad. I studied finance and economics, went to Wall Street. I had never even been to New York. I didn't know what Wall Street was, but I heard they had a lot of money there. And so I went straight to Wall Street to start my career at Lehman Brothers, the famed investment bank, and then moved into private equity, et cetera. Along the way, though, I had this vision that, hey, once I make it, once I have financial security, then the world will be great, I'll be happy. But the interesting thing is I'd finally reached that point. After Stanford Business School, I'd gone back to private equity, investing in technology. I worked in Silicon Valley. I then said, I kind of got to that point, what I thought was the top of the mountain, and I had an existential crisis. I thought, is this what I'm here to do with my time and talents on this planet? And I could, with all respect to anyone deploying capital, I want to say I greatly respect the profession and love it. But I really had to reach to say the pension fund that I help helps people. You know, I really had to, I didn't feel a tangible identity and touch to the impact I had in the world. And so I started to try and look for what was next. And it led me on the journey I'm on now, right? I led a composite materials business that replaces steel and infrastructure with more sustainable infrastructure. I founded Vents, which was like a Fitbit for cows and sheep that digitizes rotational grazing, which we exited to Merck. And then I founded Pure Harvest Smart Farms. And what I've found in this is not only really exciting businesses, wonderful applications of technology in complex industries, but I found purpose. And I think that's been really important to me. And I think as I've gone on, I'm surrounded by other people that share that cause. I've been part of the COP summits, right? I was part of the UAE's delegation to the COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. And I was part of winning the COP summit for 28 in the UAE, and I was proud of that. And then also being part of it there, it's opening my eyes, right? You're at the coalface of confronting things like climate change every day, which only, I think, reinvigorates your focus and purpose. I also had a daughter. I have a 3.5-year-old girl who I'm completely in love with. And I think about the world we're leaving her, and it just reinvigorates my focus on this cause. So I really found my way to that purpose, but I think it's made for a more fulfilling career and a more fulfilling life.
Yeah, I love that image of getting to the top of the mountain and then being like, now what? You know?
What have I done?
What have I done? Rama, how about you?
So I was born in Syria, but then grew up in Saudi Arabia on the coastline of the same Gulf that we're at here. And as a young person, we spent a lot of time with the family on the beach. We spent a lot of time in the farms of the Saudi friends that we had. And so there was a connection to nature, whether I was in Al Khubar, Saudi Arabia, or in Syria when we would go visit my grandparents. And back then, in the 70s, the communities lived much more in harmony with nature, and you could feel that healing property of nature in the calm that surrounded everyone. When I moved back to the region years later, I felt that the built environment was taking over people's personal spaces and comforts, and in conversations with a lot of the Emiratis that I worked with, you could sense that. You can sense that disconnection from nature and how negative the impact was on the well-being of people. Took up diving, my first investment was in a wildlife production company that documented all of the flora and fauna of the region, and just absolutely fell in love with everything from the anemones to the fish that we were covering underwater and the landscape. And from there, I started investing in companies that were doing either climate education in schools, or other sort of like harvesting water from the humidity. Just kind of seeing how we can somehow preserve what we had before, or bring some of it back.
Okay. Well, we're almost out of time, but in the short amount that we have left, I want to ask each of you maybe to give something to the people in the audience with a piece of advice for anybody out there who is thinking about investing, in the climate space, or founding a company and working. Why don't we start with you, Rama? One piece of advice. You
have to love climate and be absolutely passionate about it to invest in it. And I'd love to have a conversation with you after this.
My view is don't abandon the fundamentals of economics and the motivations of the incumbent system that you're trying to disrupt, right? Farmers, they need to make a living. They have resource constraints. They live in political environments that have complexity. But you've really got to acknowledge those realities, because your cause and your belief in your cause isn't enough. There needs to be a business case. So I actually believe in the very beginning of your solution design, you need to be thinking about how can sustainability be a source of competitive advantage in this industry. Mm-hmm. Not if you're relying on a benefactor billionaire or some policy change that borrows from someone else's pocket to put in yours to make your industry exist, it's going to be a tough go. And so I think that be mindful that it still needs to be a real, there's one pillar of sustainability people don't talk about is profitability. And it's a key pillar if you want to scale that solution and have a real impact. But then if you think about that ahead of time, you can design a better business case and ultimately have a greater impact.
All right. All right, well, I want to thank you both. Thanks, everybody, for being with us. Rama Shikaki, partner at Transform VC, and Sky Kurtz, founder and CEO of Pure Harvest Smart Farms. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay.